Good morning, everyone. This May 21st, 2018, special joint City Council and Redevelopment Agency meetings called to order. This meeting has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. These proceedings are being video recorded as well as presented live on KCLV Cable Channel 2 and are closed captioned for hearing impaired viewers. Please note customers' entry links from Cox Communications. You may view this program in high definition on Channel 1002. The council meeting, as well as all other KCLV programming, may be viewed on the internet at www.kclv.tv/live. The proceedings will be rebroadcast KCLV Channel 2 on the web Thursday, May 24th, 1 p.m., Friday, May 25th, 6 p.m., and Sunday, May 27th at 8:30 p.m. This building is protected by state-of-the-art fire detection and suppression sprinkler system. If alarm should activate during today's meeting, please evacuate using the exits back of the chambers going out to the mezzanine. Proceed out the double doors to the terrace. Go down the back staircase. For anyone who has difficulty with stairs, please check with a marshal or fire official for assistance. Once outside, assemble on the northeast corner across the street from City Hall at Lewis and First Streets. Employees wearing safety vests or city marshals will inform you when it's safe to re-enter the building. For public comment related items on the agenda, citizen participation, public hearing items, we have available a speaker card. A speaker card which you may complete and submit to the city clerk. Cards are available online in the clerk's office or at the rear of these chambers. If you do not submit a card, it does not prevent you from speaking under public comment, citizen participation, or specified public hearing items. If you received a pink card in the mail regarding the meeting today, please bring that forward when you come up to speak and staff will collect it from you. If anyone's present today who has need for hearing impaired equipment, please see our city clerk staff. If you parked in the parking garage across the street, please be sure to have your ticket validated by security officers when exiting. Before we proceed with the agenda, would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 4. Correct? Okay. Okay, public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. The amount of time any single speaker is allowed may be limited. All comments made will be cross-referenced to those specific items. If anyone submitted a speaker card who wishes to speak under this portion of the agenda, please come to the podium, state your name for the record. This is your opportunity to address the council, but council will not respond or engage in dialogue. We will set the time at 1 minute. We'll close the public comment and move on to agenda item 5. Public hearing and discussion for possible action regarding fiscal year 2019 City of Las Vegas tentative budget, fiscal year 2019 City of Las Vegas final budget, including capital improvement plan, and item 6, public hearing and discussion for possible action regarding fiscal year 2019 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency tentative budget and fiscal year 2019 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency final budget. Mr. Adams, come on.
Good morning. Scott Adams, City Manager. It is my distinct pleasure as your City Manager, on behalf of the Manager's Office, all of the departments of the City, and the City's finance team, to present to you a final budget for FY19. The budget that we'll be presenting the highlights to you of today represent addressing your priorities that we've worked with you on over the last couple months It represents the priorities that have been set forth out of our citizen survey. Our citizens kind of told us a lot about their desires and priorities. And even our employee engagement survey, because a few things in here deal with issues that create sustainability and ability to create a competitive workforce going forward. We've expanded, this has been an interesting budget. We've expanded in certain areas of the budget through contraction in other areas of the budget. So this really has been an interesting process of moving money from as areas of lower priority to areas of higher priority as you've set forth those priorities. And I think we've indicated to you previously that we are seeing or projecting forward that there is a slight structural deficit, certainly nothing like we experienced back in the recession days, but nevertheless there is a structural deficit that we're addressing through what I've called Team 2020, which is really a 2020 view of the 2020 budget, so that we're a year ahead of getting on the budget so we don't have to scramble last minute and make hasty decisions about how we make these cuts for 2020. And I'm pleased to say we've put the Team 2020 in place, and they've already met a couple times, and they've already generated ideas for what we're going to be doing next year. So we are not letting any grass grow under our feet in terms of that process. But to give you the overview of the budget for 19, I'm going to turn it over to Gary Ameling, our CFO, and our finance team.
Thank you, Scott. For the record, Gary Ameling, Chief Financial Officer. Good morning to all of you. I'd like to first start off just to give a few shout-outs and thanks to the Council for your policy direction during this budget process. We really appreciate the feedback that you gave us through the various briefings that we had throughout the beginning of the year. Also, thanks to the staff in the Finance Department led by Finance Director Vanetta Appleyard and her staff, to all of the department heads, many of whom are here today, as well as their chief department staff that worked on the budget, as well as the staff throughout the city that worked tirelessly on putting together the budget for fiscal year 2019. I've got a number of slides to go through this morning. I'm going to highlight the budget and talk about where there's been some changes from the tentative budget that we presented to you a couple months ago. And we're going to go through the focus of the presentation, which will be primarily on the city's general fund, which provides the majority of the day-to-day services for the city, but we'll also be covering the capital budget and the redevelopment agency budget as well. So to start off with, we're going to look first at the current fiscal year and see how we're doing compared to the budget for this fiscal year 2018. Looking first at the revenue side of the budget, we're expecting overall to be about $1.6 million over budget. That's up about $0.3 million from the tentative budget presentation we made a couple months ago. Overall growth is about 2.3%. Our estimate was 2.6%. I'm sorry, overall budget growth was 2.3%. We're estimating to be about 2.6% growth compared to the prior year. Our consolidated tax, which is our largest revenue source, was budgeted to grow at 3.2%, and as we've talked about in the briefings, it's been outperforming the budget. We're currently estimating to end about 4.7% over budget, which would generate about $4.4 million greater than budgeted revenues for the city. Property tax, our next largest revenue source, we estimated 5.3% growth for the year. We're coming in slightly below that number at about 4.9%. Licenses and franchise growth, budgeted at 3.5% growth. We're experiencing growth at 4.3%, so we're about $800,000 over budget in that category. And then other revenue sources were budgeted decrease 7.8%. We're seeing slightly greater decrease than what we anticipated, about $3.2 million under budget there. Overall, general fund revenues are about $1.6 million over budget. On the expenditure side of the budget, we're estimating to be $4.1 million under budget at year end. This is up about $400,000 from the prior presentation. So that's good news. We've had lower overall budgeted growth of expenditures, lower than budgeted growth in expenditures, which is good. Labor budget is about $1.9 million below budget. You can see there the positions that were added in the general fund and other funds for this current fiscal year. Many of those positions have been filled at this point in the year. And then our non-labor budget is coming in about 5.8% growth versus the 8.5% budgeted growth. That's about $2.2 million below budget. The proposed budget for next year does take into account using some ending fund balance from this current fiscal year. About $2 million is going towards one-time requests that are part of the expansion budget for FY19. And then we're proposing to send $3.2 million to the capital program, which is funding capital projects for fiscal year 19. Turning now to the fiscal year 19 budget, just a few highlights on this slide. The consolidated tax, we're expecting moderate growth for the year, 4.7% over our fiscal year 18 estimate. We did seek out and receive economic projections help from various other outside entities, so that was helpful in putting together the estimate for this coming year. And obviously, since it's our largest revenue source, we have to keep paying attention to it because, as we know, it can go up and it can go down. Property tax caps for next fiscal year are at 3% for residential and 4.2% for non-residential. Therefore, we're estimating about 5.5% growth over the current year-end estimate for property tax. The expanded requests are in the priority areas, as the city manager said in his introductory slide. We're aligning with the council's priorities in public safety, homelessness, and neighborhood support in particular. And then the proposed budget for fiscal year 19 is a balanced budget, meaning revenues are equal to expenditures. Looking first at the revenue side of the budget in a little bit more detail, the overall budget revenues are projected to increase by 4.2%. Consolidated tax, as I mentioned on the prior slide, is estimated to grow by 4.7%, property tax by 5.5%. That's primarily driven by assessed value increases, but as we know, due to the tax caps, the tax growth itself will be limited to the secondary caps, which are going to be based on CPI, which is going to yield 3% growth for residential and 4.2% growth for non-residential for the coming year. We still have abatement on the books estimated at $33.7 million. We are seeing low growth in several of our revenue categories, including licenses and franchises, which are expected to grow by 3%, and fines and charges for services and other revenues are expected to grow by 2.4%. And then we will see also a flat contribution that's continuing from the redevelopment agency of $1.7 million for maintenance of downtown areas. This chart shows you general fund revenues by major category. As you can see, the largest slice by far is the consolidated tax, which is about 54.7%. That is our largest revenue source. It's also one of our most economically sensitive. If you recall, it did reach a peak prior to the Great Recession and then declined, about $60 million decline, or 24%. It took about 10 years to get back to that peak after that decline from the Great Recession. The next largest source is property tax, about 18% of our budget. This also is a very economically sensitive revenue source. Due to the housing crisis, the property values declining, and the foreclosure crisis that happened, we saw a peak of $135 million back in fiscal year 2009, and then we declined $46 million from that peak, or 34.5%. Even with the projected growth that we're putting into next year's budget, we're still going to be about $30 million down from that where we were back in 2009. So obviously that is a constraint on our city budget and a constraint in terms of providing services that we would like to provide. The next largest category is licenses and franchises at 16%, and then other revenue sources make up the last 11% of our overall $573 million general fund budget for next year. I should have mentioned earlier, too, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, I'd be happy to take them as we go, or to answer them when I get to the conclusion at the end.
I did have a question, if I could, right here.
Sure.
Where you're talking about the residential tax at 3.0 and other is 4.2, tell me, if you have a short-term rental, do you pay the 4.2 or do you pay the 3.0?
That is an excellent question. I
Would bring
believe
more
that
money.
since it's a residence that we're talking about, and it would be similar to if somebody was renting out a house as an ongoing residential rental property, that they're paying the residential property tax, not the commercial property tax, because the property is zoned residential.
Well, you're telling me that if I have an SRT and I use it, I use my home for that, I'm called commercial when I get a business, when I get a license, it says it on my license and everything, that I don't have to pay the business tax?
This isn't the business tax, this is the property tax piece, so you would pay the city's business tax associated with that
Right.
short-term rental, but you would pay property tax based on the underlying zoning of the property, which is residential property.
I have to tell you, it's so confusing to me how you can take that piece of property that you don't have to have a big explanation, but I just can't see how sometimes that property is residential and sometimes it's commercial.
Just like an apartment complex, which, you think of as a residential property, but it has a commercial aspect to it. The property taxes go with the underlying basis of what kind of property it is and what the property is being used for, which in this case would be residential, as opposed to like a hotel, which is always used for commercial purposes.
Too bad, I thought maybe we'd have some more money.
Excuse me, if I might add to that, another question. Doesn't the owner of the property pay the property tax? The short-term rental individual would pay the business tax, so you'd get both.
We would get both, that's right. We'd get the residential property tax. We also get the short-term business tax, yes.
Wait, put back on.
Are we then charging the 4.2 to the person who owns the land, as well as charging the business tax?
My understanding is that we are not. The county is the one who's levying the property taxes, and so that property tax is shared amongst all the taxing jurisdictions that share in the property tax pie. So the county would be levying the 3% cap on the property taxes, and then we would be levying, as part of our business tax, the tax that's specifically for short-term rentals, as well as our room tax, which is the tax on top of
I
that.
think it's an excellent question. Can we pursue that? Because if in fact I own it's my second property, I live somewhere else.
In California,
And I pay
Ohio.
property tax, but I'm paying it on just the ownership flat. If in fact I'm using it for business income, it should go under, I think we need to follow that up. It should be paying at the higher rate because I'm not living there. I should be paying property tax, but not as a residence. It should be as a business.
I'd be happy to check some more on that with you.
Great. I think it's a great question. Good. And Councilwoman, yes.
Thank you. So as we continue working on our new ordinance, Mayor Pro Tem, with Councilman Steve Soroka, we are with the STRs looking at having the revenue generating tax, which would be at a much higher percent going to the city.
Madam Mayor?
I think I'll tag on that, too. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll go after you. Oh, right.
Go ahead,
Well,
please.
no, because I have a separate question regarding something different.
Be happy to take over.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that, actually, although we do get the rate on commercial, and the rate of increase is allowably larger based upon assessed value, are we still at a cap on that particular portion of the tax where we're not able to collect the 9% yet? Are we still living off the overages from before the recession?
Are you talking about the abatements?
Correct. Well, the ability, we have a cap on property tax
Yes.
increase, the assessed value increase, and which of course drives your property tax. So there's a big gap in there. A lot of people still don't know after 15 years. So the question becomes, are we able to tap into that yet, or are we still capped out? And I'm not sure I'm using the right term, Gary.
Well, the
City manager was here.
basic cap is 3% for residential and 8% for commercial property. The secondary cap, which is I think it's the greater of the historical average or 2 times the consumer price index, is the one that's in play for this coming year. So 2 times the CPI is what's yielding that cap on the commercial property. The 3% is lower than the 2 times CPI for residential, so the 3% is the one that is in play for residential, but for commercial property, we're under the 8% cap because of the 2 times CPI limit. on
Yes, they
secondary
both
cap.
are, and they built up a residual so that they're living off that for a long time.
Right.
And we just need to make sure that we share with the assessor all of the STRs that we know about, so that they can do their own investigating to make sure they're on the map as commercial properties to be taxed at a higher rate because they are for property tax, because that's available, they're new, there's a turnover there, so they're going to start without that old protection. All new construction starts with a different base, so, we just need to make sure they know there's thousands of commercial pieces out there that are hiding as residential. I'm sure they're hiding. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Creer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you explain to me, and I might ask you some remedial questions because it's my first time going to this, what's $33 million in abatement What does that consist of? What does that mean?
So that's really the difference between what a property growth in terms of their assessed valuation was and what they're actually going to be taxed on. So under those caps that we talked about, the tax cannot increase any more than 3% for residential or 8% for commercial, and then there's a secondary tax calculation that can limit that even further. The last several years, we've seen that secondary tax calculation come into play because CPI was so much lower than the 3% or the 8% caps. So the difference between the caps and what the actual assessed value growth is what's called abatement, and that abatement basically gets stored on your property. And if you look at your property tax bill, you'll see there is a number there that's the difference between that valuation that the assessor has deemed as the value of your property and what they're actually going to be allowed to tax you on. So that difference is stored up, and then if the property values ever decline, which we know that they can, then that abatement may get used up to basically protect the city from a shock like we did experience when the property taxes declined so dramatically in the last Great Recession.
And then with the $1.6 million in revenues over the budget, is that an actual or are those anticipated revenues for 2019? Anticipated revenues of $1.6 million.
So that's the amount that we're anticipating to be over this current year that's ending next month. That's the
Okay.
amount we're anticipating to be over in the general fund overall for all of our revenues combined. So that $1.6 million is being put into the bottom line as an ending fund balance, and so that's helping us achieve our ending fund balance reserve target levels. Some of the ending fund balance was proposed and is still being proposed to be sent either to the capital budget for next year to fund capital projects that cannot be supported by other revenue sources, and some of it was proposed to fund some of the one-time costs associated with the expansions that we're proposing for next fiscal year.
So you've already incorporated the $1.6 million in additional revenue somewhere within the 2019 budget? You've reinvested that
You'll
money?
actually see it, I think, on a slide, a couple slides later, but
Okay.
it flows into the bottom line. The additional amount over what we had assumed is flowing into the ending fund balance projection for
And
next.
some of those dollars are encumbered, you're saying, on certain?
They're not encumbered, but they're projected to flow into the ending fund balance, and we have a reserve target that's been established by the City Council to try to achieve 20% ending fund balance to help protect us and when those downturns come about.
Okay,
So-
great. I'll look for that slide. Thank you.
Okay. So the next couple slides deal with the expenditure side of the proposed budget for fiscal year 19. Overall, our budget proposed is to grow 4.3% compared to the fiscal year 18 budget, and 5.3% compared to our year-end estimate for this current fiscal year. The primary driver behind that is contractual wage increases that have been scheduled through our labor contracts, the increase in the budget for Metro, and the additional positions that are being proposed to align with council priority areas. We are hoping to sustain as many programs as we can. The city manager discussed the fact that we're having to reallocate some of our resources from areas of lower priority to areas of top priority. The contractual obligations in our collective bargaining contracts, we are assuming a vacancy rate for all departments in this fiscal year budget, 3% in all departments except 6% in the fire department. And the reason why the fire department is slightly higher is because we have a number of positions, basically overstaffed positions that we call rovers, that are budgeted in addition to the regular staff to help compensate for absences that we know that are going to take place that are going to cause either overtime, if not staffed by those rover positions. The Metro increase for this coming fiscal year was proposed at 6.6%. That includes the use of $6.8 million in fund balance contribution. Overall, that yields about a $9 million increase compared to where we are at for the current fiscal year that we are absorbing in next year's budget. That will fund 23 additional civilian and 13 additional officer positions to maintain Metro's target of having 2 officers per 1,000 of population. And then, if you recall, part of what Metro did this year is they asked, and both the county and the city agreed through the Metro Fiscal Affairs Group, to move the crossing guard contract from Metro to the county and to the city. So we've moved $1.7 million out of the Metro budget and $1.7 million into the city's budget to take care of that service. The proposed budget does include 64 new and restored positions, and you can see that how they play out in this table. 47 of those are in the general fund, 17 are in other funds, and then 36 of those are in public safety or non-public safety positions, and 28 are in public safety positions. We also had 8 positions that we reallocated as part of that 64, so we're really adding 56 new additional full-time equivalent positions in the position request for next fiscal year. In terms of some of the areas where we were able to put expansion into the budget for next year, I mentioned the Metro funding increase of about $9 million. We have a new program in the fire department, fire and rescue of mobile integrated healthcare. In the Department of Public Safety, we had in our base budget for next year the second year of a 3-year plan to add 13 marshals per year. We've also accelerated the third phase of that mid-year into fiscal year 19 from fiscal year 20 to try to accelerate those additional marshals. In the Public Works area, motor vehicle fuel tax supported projects is included in next year's budget. In the homeless area, this is a key focus area for next year. We've added about $1.6 million to the budget. That includes 7 new FTEs, additional monies for private security, as well as contractual services and porta potties for the new homeless courtyard. Also in the O&M neighborhood area for support, we're adding money for graffiti and tree programs, $150,000 each over and above what was included in this year's budget. In legal and internal audit departments, we're adding 2 positions in the city attorney's area for dealing with body-worn camera video, and 1 position in the auditor's department that'll be an IT auditor for next fiscal year. And then we also have funded areas that we felt were contractually obligated to. Examples of those are additional overtime in the Fire and Rescue Department, additional costs in our Department of Public Safety for medical services contracts, the Regional Justice Center, we have to fund the maintenance costs associated with that building, and then the Animal Foundation increase in our annual contract with the Animal Foundation. We also have some increases in IT technology costs that are primarily driven by software application licensing and maintenance fees that are refunded in next year's budget as well. And then lastly, there is a pool for appointive and executive staff. We increased that pool from 3% to 4% to try to deal with some salary inequities that have taken place over the course of several years. This next slide highlights a few of the changes, and there really were not very many between the tentative budget and what we're proposing for the final budget. We did go back and reevaluate the salary and benefit costs for all of the positions in the city's budget. There was a slight reduction overall when we took into account changes in positions. That saved us about $300,000. We did, though, see the need to increase the outside counsel support in the city attorney's office, so those 2 things offset each other. So our expenditure budget that we're proposing for next year is actually the same as what it was overall when we proposed the tentative budget to you a couple months ago. There is 5 additional positions over and above what we had shown you before, and you'll see that on a couple of slides. Those are for council and neighborhood support. The funding for those was included in the total from before, but we just didn't have the FTE positions included on our FTE table. In the other funds...
Excuse me, could you be specific about those 5 positions?
Yes, and in fact, I'll get to that on the next slide. I've got actually a bullet for that on the next slide. In the other funds area, we are adding 3 positions to support the Strong Start Mobile Pre-K program. This is funded through the education set-aside. That's a piece of the 18% that is required to be set aside from redevelopment agency tax increment monies. We also have put some additional monies into capital projects. We were able to close out some projects that had some monies left over, and so there were some capital projects that we reviewed with you at last week's briefing that we're putting that money towards, as well as monies that are going towards the Fremont Street Experience Project, which you approved the bond issue for at your meeting last week. That is a debt issuance primarily, but there is a contribution from the LVCVA of $9.5 million of cash, and then there's $1.0 million contribution from the city's redevelopment agency in addition to the debt draws that are anticipated for next year. And so we've added that to the budget now that that project is fully funded. As I mentioned, we're proposing 47 additional positions in the general fund for next year. The top 6 or 7 bullets there is exactly what you saw back in the tentative budget. The last one that's highlighted in red on this slide is the 5 positions that I just mentioned previously. This allows us to get up to 3 positions per ward for each of the wards in terms of council staff assistants. And then there's a couple of additional positions that are proposed for neighborhood support to help bolster the area of providing services to neighborhoods.
I'm assuming then that when you decide to add 3 for all wards, that you went through the past history of it and looked at why they had not had 3 for all wards previously.
We did, Mayor Pro Tem, and we've talked to each of the council members, and we've discussed the needs in each of the wards, and so this is obviously a balancing act, but a couple of the wards may not use the positions that we're authorizing, but we felt it was equitable to at least have the positions authorized in case they are desired or needed for those particular ward activities. So there's been some changes over time in terms of the activities within each ward, and in talking to each of the council members, it made sense to at least put the authorization for those positions in the budget for next year.
In the past, we had meetings where we all met together. It was discussed in council meetings, so we could all discuss why and where and all that business.
And in fact, we are briefing on that topic again tomorrow, at your briefing tomorrow.
We're briefing, but when we're briefing with 3 of us, maybe, or 2 sometimes at the meeting. The problem is sometimes not having everybody so we can get everybody's ideas. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Madam Mayor, through you, question?
Yes,
So,
Councilman.
thank you. So what are the 5 positions, the council and the neighborhood support? Are they just 5 positions and you haven't really?
So for the past several years, there's been a slight difference in the number of positions allocated to each of the ward offices.
Right.
Several of the wards have 2 positions allocated, and several of the wards have 3 positions allocated. So 3 of the 5 positions are to give a 3rd position to the 3 wards that didn't currently have, 2, 4, and 6, didn't currently have 3 positions in the budget. Whether or not those positions will be filled or not is up to each of the council members, but this is part of our proposal and the change to the council staffing level. The other 2 positions would be for neighborhood support, and so they would be initially at least put under the Administrative Services Department, but the city manager has indicated that he's going to be looking for some direction and some ideas to how to try to best put together a neighborhood support team for the city.
In the past, when we had the additional ones, the 3rd one added to some wards, they were people who were sort of left over in other parts. They weren't people that were hired by the council member necessarily. They were people who needed positions someplace else because wherever they were got eliminated. So that's what happened. So then what would you do? Are you going to allow all of the council then to choose again? Since the ones who have one really didn't have that opportunity before. Well, one did.
Well, this is part of the ongoing discussion of staffing in the council offices, and it provides, the position authorization provides the flexibility so that if there's a person currently in there that's part of the past number of people that were coming from other departments, that can continue, or the council member may choose to use this position authorization to fill
I just mentioned this because in all this time, I have not had anybody come to me and talk to me personally, about the adding of the things, and that's okay. I just felt that the people who are new should understand why and for what reason, and that they weren't, a new position was not added so much as it was moved from where it wasn't needed to someplace else. Thank you.
Thank you for that historical perspective. It's very useful.
I want that on the record for the future. Thank you.
Hey, Gary, I spoke with, I believe, you and also our city manager, and I thought about a concept of, as we're talking about additional people, about a liaison for the council in general that addresses veteran services, a specific person that potentially could be shared by council members that deal with issues for the city and strictly for veterans and issues. And we all, each one of our roles and our wards has issues that regarding veterans, and we put a lot of emphasis and we respect our veterans so much, but I'm not sure, and I've only been here a short period of time, of specifically how we're looking at and addressing issues for veterans. And I know each one of us has a need for outreach and a need for someone to shepherd that extremely important cause. And so as we're thinking about that, I throw that out there. I'm the new guy, so I'm not sure where that lands, but I know that it's so important to all of us. That's it.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Coffin, please.
Thank you, ma'am. I've been here 7 years, and I'm still learning, Councilman, and it is a fact. And consequently, this is the first budget since our new city manager took over, and I'm not even sure it's been full 12 months, but Scott was here when this was constructed. Were you also here, Gary?
I was. This is my 2nd budget here with the city, but I started about 14 months ago.
It's important to note, and thank you all for following through with the council's request, begging, demanding to get more marshals and accelerate and expand the Marshal Corps. We still need more, but I think it's having an effect. Our town is so darn big, we just don't have enough. And I guess if we were on a war footing, if we literally were in crisis, we probably could do whatever we wanted in that regard, because we would need more. Hurrier. We just can't exceed our tax limitations, and that's a problem. But as long as we continually remind people that all the things that marshals do are public service, and all their places, public safety, and all the places they go are part of our public safety network. So parks and playgrounds, people don't think of them as part of our public safety realm, just like streets and highways, but they are every bit as important, because without those marshals moving people around in those parks, we wouldn't have the ability to keep them out of the neighborhoods. And now with the courtyard opening up in July, man, that's so good, because we'll be able to start encouraging them to move away from their little encampments in the parks to a place of safety for all of us, including the neighbors, starting, well, hopefully in July. So that's a big deal, but it takes years to do this stuff. So here we are, a year later. We're just beginning to see the effects. And patience, for all those who are watching, patience is the watchword. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes, please, Councilman Soroka.
Yeah, I just
Thank you.
wanted to hear on Councilman Coffin's comment, but primarily wanted to give a piggyback here on Councilman Creer's notion of the veteran support. And just about the same time in office that he was, I had the same conversation with our city manager, and he was on board. Our neighboring city to the north, North Las Vegas, has an entire commission dedicated to veterans, and we thought this would be a good place to start for our city. So I agree with your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you for that feedback. Turning now to the other funds, additional 17 positions are being recommended in other funds other than the general fund. Most of those are in the enterprise funds, 2 in the building and safety area, 3 in parking for our enterprise fund there, 4 in operations and maintenance for neighborhood support, 3 in public works, primarily supported by the monies from the enterprise fund for sanitation. And then in the internal service fund and special revenue funds, 1 additional position that's part of the Project Eddie development services effort, 1 in operations and maintenance, and 3, which are the new ones I mentioned, are the change from the tentative budget in YDSI for the Strong Start Mobile Pre-K program, which those monies are funded through the education set-aside from the RDA. This next chart shows you our employee history over time, and you can see the decline that was necessitated by the Great Recession and the dramatic decline in some of our key revenue sources. Overall, we are back above where we were in terms of a peak prior to the recession in our public safety positions. We're now about 11% higher than where we were. However, in the non-public safety positions, we just like to highlight this, we're still well below where we were. Fortunately, we've found ways to be able to maintain most of our services and work more efficiently and focus on those high priority areas, but it obviously is a struggle because that's been pointed out here this morning. Revenue sources are our big constraint, and so we don't have enough money to put towards everything we would like to do, but we're just trying to be best in responding towards your highest priority areas. Looking at how the general fund expenditures break out in terms of a couple of pie charts, this first pie chart shows you in terms of by account category. As with most cities that provide most of its services from its general fund with people, the large majority of our general fund budget is for salary and benefits costs. In fact, if you considered the slice, the gray slice on the left side of this chart, which is the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, if you consider that slice is primarily people also, and most cities who would have their own police department would consider that to be part of their overall salary and benefit costs. Total of the salary and benefits slice on the right plus the metro slice on the left is about 80% of our general fund budget going to support actual people on the street in these positions. The next largest slice, the non-labor slice at the top left-hand part of the pie chart, is primarily for supplies and services. And then the smaller slice is debt service along the left side at 3% of our budget, and then a very small piece at the bottom for other costs. Looking how you would break out the general fund budget by functional area, the majority of our services go towards public safety, which is really no surprise. Most cities put most of their resources towards public safety. Right about 2/3 of our budget, or 67%, go towards public safety services. The next largest slice, general government on the upper left side, that would be all of the support services departments, plus the planning department, development services center, administration, as well as some of the non-departmental costs in the general fund budget. And then you can see cultural and rec is the next largest slice, judicial, and then public works along the left side of the chart. This chart shows you the overall general fund budget and how it compares for the last couple of fiscal years. You can see for fiscal year 19, which is highlighted in gray at the right-hand side of the chart, the individual revenue account and revenue category revenue estimates for next fiscal year total to $573.7 million. Looking down on the expenditure side, you'll see that the total there is also $573.7 million, so we have what we're proposing is a balanced budget for next fiscal year that does not rely on reserves. But if you do look over in the middle column, the fiscal year 18, and this gets back to Councilman Creer's question from before, you will see that the revenues at $550.6 million are projected to exceed the expenditures at $544.9 million by $5.7 million. We are proposing to transfer the majority of that money out of the general fund to support one-time costs for next year's budget proposals as well as capital projects. But about $500,000 of that would remain in the ending fund balance. So our ending fund balance would basically be close to our 20% target at the end of next fiscal year at 19.6 according to this calculation. However, we are hopeful that we will underspend our budget like we typically do and still achieve a 20% overall ending fund balance. We also have the fiscal stabilization reserve, which is about $13 million, which helps get that ending fund balance above the 20% target. This next chart just shows you the trend in revenues and expenditures over time. The green line represents our revenue collections in any given fiscal year. The red bars show you the expenditures for that fiscal year, and you can see that the two are on top of each other for fiscal year 19. That's our proposed balanced budget. We have seen the last 5 fiscal years in a row, we've seen revenues exceed expenditures, which is what you're always shooting for. But you can see in the early parts of this chart, in fiscal year 9, 10, maybe even fiscal year 11, we had to rely on those reserves to weather the storm of the Great Recession. So that's what the importance of having those reserves really is, to help get you through that rainy day period.
Hey, Gary, hey, question for you. With the reserves, you said we're at $13 million now, and our goal is to get to 20% of the overall revs, of the budget, correct?
Yeah, we have a hard target of, I think, 12%. To try to maintain a 12%, but we have an aspirational goal target of 20% of our general fund expenditures. So that's enough to cover basically a little bit less than a quarter of a year. So if we experience the kind of decline that we did in the Great Recession, we have to rely on those those reserves to help.
How much did we have prior to the recession? I'm sure we tapped into it during, correct?
We did, yes.
Do you have any idea? Do you remember what that number might have been?
I can get that for you, but I don't have that number.
Yeah, just wondering. Today. Then how far off? So. Okay, so we have a long ways to go, but we're making progress.
We're basically at our target, our aspirational goal target of 20%, and then we have, in addition to the basic reserve, we have what we call the fiscal stabilization reserve, which is monies that were pulled out of some other funds during the Great Recession to help bolster our general fund reserves. So that's the second line at the bottom of this chart. So the first line says fund balance reserve 19.6%. which is the second to the bottom number on the right side. I apologize, it's a little bit smaller than the other numbers. And then right below that, you'll see 21.9%. That's the total ending fund balance with the fiscal stabilization reserve, in addition to the regular fund balance reserve. And that fund balance includes some other things like, money is set aside for accounts payable and for compensated absences and the like. So it's not all spendable money, but the vast majority of it is monies that can be accessed in terms of needing to be covering costs in terms of a Great Recession or some kind of recessionary activity.
All right, so it's 20% of revenues is what I'm looking at.
20%, that's right.
Thank you.
As part of our budget each year, we also look out in the future to try to see whether or not the projected revenues based on the current mix of revenue sources and the projected expenditures based on the current services that we're providing are affordable into the future. The city manager mentioned at the beginning of his presentation that when we put together the 5-year forecast for this current budget year, we saw that there's a small structural deficit. This chart attempts to highlight that deficit and show you a little bit about it. 5-year forecasts are basically a compilation of all of your individual revenue projections and all of your individual expenditure projections. This particular 5-year forecast assumes moderate economic growth throughout the 5-year forecast horizon. In other words, it's not a recession-based projection. So one thing that I will point out is technically the Great Recession, even though it was experienced for a long period of time, technically it ended in June of 2009. That means that next month will be 9 years since the Great Recession ended. Typically, in post-World War II times, the average time between recessions is about 5 years. So we are well past the typical time between recessions, and so we always have to keep an eye on this because, as we talked about just a moment ago, we need to have reserves in place so that when the next recession comes, we can weather that storm without having to make service reductions.
The graph, if I might, Ms. Stramling, the graph on the page before, this one, you briefly showed it, yeah. If you were to project out to 2024, this would then be on inverted?
So the chart here on the screen right now actually shows you the difference between the revenues and expenditures for the last couple of years.
Right.
That's actually equal to the green bars that you see on this chart.
Right.
So in fiscal year 2017, we had a $19.8 million budget surplus. On this chart, you can see that in fiscal year 17, the green is above the red. That's that same $19.8 million surplus. And then the next year was a $5.7 million surplus, which you can see on this chart here. So the two charts actually equal. The data is same for the historical period. The difference in this chart is that we've now projected that out 5 years into the future. And what we're seeing when we do that is that there's some major drivers that we see ahead that we're having to, what's happening is the growth rate in expenditures is projected to exceed the growth rate in revenues. And
So does that mean there's going to be a call for tax increments, or what? How do you handle this?
So that's the purpose of Team 2020 the city manager was talking about at the beginning of his presentation. The primary drivers are that, we have things that we have to fund. We also have things that we want to fund. So for example, next fiscal year, in fiscal year 20, the one beyond the year that we're proposing to be adopted today, we will be funding the second half, or in other words, a full year of that third tranche of those 13 marshals. So we're putting that into the projections for fiscal year 20. We're also putting into the projections for fiscal year 20 an additional fire company to staff up Station 103. As you recall, we've temporarily moved a fire company from Station 3 while it is reconstructed over to Station 103. But after that crew moves back, we see a need for another crew at Station 103. So we've put that into the fiscal year 20 projection. We've also put into the fiscal year 20 projection a proposed, not proposed at this point, but an expected increase in the pension rate that we have to pay into Nevada PERS. And so we're looking at that as well as the cost of other benefits, because benefits costs are a major driver in our budget.
Well,
So
and
when we
two,
put
if I
those-
might, just remembering our last council meeting when the Howard Hughes Corporation came in about expanding their into the 6,000 square miles, or what, no, acres, I guess it is, acres that they were going to be adding or needing fire station there. So that comes about within this same time period.
Yeah, we're going to be continuously doing updates to this 5-year forecast. In fact, I'm working with the finance department right now. We have a new piece of budget software that we implemented this year that's going to help us in terms of making this projection even better. And so we're going to be doing some what-if analyses to try to put those kinds of things into the forecast. As you mentioned, there's a lot of development activity that's on the drawing table, and it comes with additional costs for providing the services to those new homes, but it also comes with additional revenues. As we all know, based on the constraints in property tax, generally speaking, property tax is not sufficient. The piece that we get anyways is not sufficient to provide all of those services. So that's something that we have to continuously be on the lookout for.
And also way out in Ward 6, I'm sure, too. More fire stations there. Yes, please.
Mayor, this Scott Adams, city manager. Let me
I'll go next.
let me put this in perspective, in historical perspective. During the depth of the recession, in total, we experienced the equivalent of about $100 million annual structural deficit. In other words, we had to cut the budget $100 million, which over 5 years was $500 million. So this is about an average of $10 million each year over 5 years, which is about a tenth of what we had to deal with during the recession. So in a percentage term, that average $10 million is about 2% of our general fund. So it's a very manageable deficit, but it is structural. I mean, because as Gary said, as you load all these things in that we know we're going to be dealing with it, we're going to be there. So we've got to write those two curves, going back to that other graph, we've really got to get the expenses on the revenues. And but it's about a 2% swing. So it's, I don't want to scare our employees. I don't want anybody to think we're back to where we were. This is very manageable. It's just, I think we have to recognize it. We got to deal with it, get on it early, and it'll be much easier to deal with than if we try to deal with it last minute.
No, I think it's very informative, because as you look at that and understand it and compare it to that chart you had before. Councilman, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just think it's, along those lines, important to make a distinction, as what Gary and you were alluding to earlier, which is correct. As we grow our community, we need to make sure that we're charging appropriately and the appropriate infrastructure is being funded. But when it comes to Howard Hughes, we have a blessing in our community, because what they have done for us is actually shouldered the burden and actually given these structures back to the city, such as they are funding and have funded the new police station in the Summerlin Area Command. They are funding and building on their own dime the new fire station 43. They are also building schools and parks and the community centers that they then later donate as appropriate back to the city. So Howard Hughes is taking it upon themselves to provide that infrastructure to take the cost off the city, and the rest of the city benefits from that. But then the question becomes, as part of Scott's 2020 plan, is are we adequately asking other developments to fund their fair share of this infrastructure increase that the city burdens on their own? And I think Scott is on that. We've talked about that previously, and I think that's part of their strategy they're developing, and I applaud their efforts in that area.
Excellent point. Councilwoman.
Thank you, Mayor. So as we sit on the budget today, I know that we, Gary, and our city manager, Mr. Adams, and all of your staff have spent hours and hours on actually going line item by line item. And as we look at this, and even though this is a scary picture, I know the council members, we've talked about revenue generating ideas as well. And as Councilman Soroka stated, we're definitely on board at looking at making sure, as we grow in the city, that our people that are helping us grow make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Could I ask now, if they're doing the fire
You're Elizabeth. I
station?
want to talk to.
He was there first, sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't know you were there at all.
I know you'll treat me right.
Yes, please, Councilman.
Well, just to say that, Gary,
was so soft, I'm sorry.
I am so quiet. I wanted to thank you for that, but remember that your talk about ordinary business cycles won't quite fit in this environment here. It's tourist and it is service-oriented, and so it's a variable. It's more like 8 or 9 years, but talk to our economic advisory team. We've got some great forecasters who are watching us and helping guide you. But in my 28 years in the legislature, we might have had about 3.5 recessions. So it's kind of the way it works in the state of Nevada, or typical tourist/service states. Because I think the Great Recession was a combination of a recession, but also panic. I think your real economists will say that was a panic. It goes like we read about all those panics from the 19th century. In fact, it was a panic in addition to whatever cyclical downturn there might have been, because we're talking about a dip in everything and a scarcity of cash all of a sudden, causing more demand for cash and, as you know, less of it available. And we had not seen anything quite that upsetting since the late 80s or the late 70s when Carter was president. So it is important to remember that we don't want to overreact just because we're near a timeline, but rather watching the signals as you are watching. And another thing, those 6,000 acres I don't know how many years they figure to build out, but let's say 10. So we'll be getting full construction dollars, new tax dollars based on new construction, which is what we live off of. But one thing that happened in the city, as I observed it over the years, in the real long rush to growth, was that all the money and attention of the city was spent out west, where the new homes were being built. And there's where you ended up with a hole in the donut, so that wards 1, 3, and 5 fell behind. It is a normal thing for homeowners to want all the money being spent from their taxes right in their neighborhood, on their street, in their park, and their community center. But it can't be that way, because the older parts of town subsidized the city for many years while it was growing in anticipation of future tax from the west side of town, the 25 years that it took to build out. And I just want to make sure that going into a new build-out on the west, that we remember that our budget and their contribution in tax dollars has to support the entire city as well. Not entirely, I mean, they deserve everything they can get, but we got to remember to spend it wisely and keep it spread out over the whole 6 wards. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman, Mayor Pro Tem?
Just in comment on what you said, how can that be done if the new roof tax monies go only to the ward in which the roof tax comes from?
If you're asking me, the RCT would go there. I think that's a good thing. It's a good incentive for them.
Okay.
But there's so much other, the real estate tax, property tax will be higher because it's all new construction.
I
We just have to
understand.
make sure it spreads out throughout the city.
And assuming that those new houses are going to bring in new people, which they
Right.
generally do, then the new people come in and they spend money in our economy, and that generates additional consolidated tax, additional franchise taxes, et cetera.
Except growth does not always pay for itself, Gary,
No,
in this
absolutely
state.
not.
We have learned that the hard way.
I've learned that the hard way over my 30-year finance
Okay.
career. Yeah.
But if you did plan to have to spend money, as you were projecting, on a new fire station, when we do know, because Hughes has told us personally, and they've kept their word so far all these years, that they're going to do it, that should help us some, shouldn't it?
Oh,
As far as the
definitely.
projected deficit?
As Councilman Soroka talked about, those development agreements do include the developers paying the one-time costs associated with some of those facilities. However, what we have to absorb is the ongoing cost of staff.
Right, but but how much is a fire station? You're in the millions and millions. I'm just saying that that's at least a breath of fresh air, I would think, to help. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
So the next couple of slides talk about our capital program proposed for next fiscal year. As you know, there's various funding sources to help fund some of the capital projects. We have the 5-cent ad valorem tax, the 1% room tax, the Community Development Block Grant Program, a residential construction tax, which was just referred to, as well as bond issuances. We also are able to reallocate some monies that are closed out from projects that have finished out under budget. And as I talked about earlier, we're proposing a $3.2 million transfer in from this current fiscal year ending balance to help fund projects in next fiscal year. We talked about some of the significant projects that are being funded by bond issuances. Some of these are already to the stage of just getting ready to start up. Fire Station 3 replacement, about $12 million project. There will be a bond issuance for the Medical District parking garage, about $15 million. The Corridor of Hope project was just funded as part of that same debt issuance that funded the Fire Station 3 project, as well as the Fremont Street Experience project. And then we're hopeful still that the downtown courthouse project may come to fruition. This is a $55 million project. It does assume that we reach an interlocal agreement with Clark County. Currently, there's one on the table, so we're hopeful that Clark County is interested in buying out our space at the Regional Justice Center, which would generate about $23 million that can be used to help offset the cost of the downtown courthouse project. And we're just getting close to getting some proposals and looking at those proposals for whether or not that project is feasible. Also, in the capital improvement plan side, the overall allocation of various funding sources for next fiscal year totals about $113 million. That does not include those projects that are funded through some of the regional agencies, like the Regional Transportation Commission, the Regional Flood Control District, and Nevada Department of Transportation. Some of the major allocations for next fiscal year include the parking garage, which I mentioned, about $15 million. Is about $15 million also for public safety projects. The city facilities number at 55 includes that potential for a new courthouse for the city. Technology projects, neighborhood recreational projects, about $5 million. Road and flood, about $5 million. The homeless initiative courtyard project at about $10 million. A total of about 60 projects for next year. Overall, we also put together a 5-year CIP plan, which we're asking your approval for as well. That totals about $952 million over the next 5 years. That number, which is a much bigger number, includes the monies from the regional agencies, projects that get
Councilman
approved
Coffin has a
separately.
question, Ms.
Thank you.
Brantley?
Again, Anna Sermon again. The issue of homelessness becomes, as I'm preaching all over the place, public safety. And I wish, as we start to orient this stuff as a separate capital expenditure line item, that we also start ranking of public safety, both in CIP as well as operating budgets, because that's where I really believe it belongs, and that's where the public understands it should be, because Every time they complain, every time they get burgled, everything that goes wrong. Burgled? I like that. I think it's right. Anyway, the point is, it goes along with shibboleths and disincentives. The idea is that we really have to sell these budgets, and we have to sell them to our public. And if they understand that homelessness is part of public safety, I absolutely think it should be a subset. It doesn't have to be just public safety, but it's got to be part of it as we promote this budget. I wish it was, we could still rewrite it and put it in there as an A item, but it literally is my big thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It is public safety, without question.
The next section is the redevelopment agency budget, and as you opened up, this public hearing is for both the city and the redevelopment agency. The redevelopment agency is actually a separate component unit of the city. We are seeing, in terms of fiscal trends, some pretty strong growth in terms of assessed valuation. For next fiscal year, we're seeing early numbers from the assessor, which indicate a 32% increase in assessed valuation in the redevelopment project areas. That will yield additional tax revenue monies, in accordance with those caps, of course, but we are expecting to see about a 15.6% increase in tax collection next fiscal year compared to this fiscal year. We are also continuing to see the Smith Center pay back the city's $20 million note, so that's included in the RDA. The RDA's $20 million note, that's included in the budget for next fiscal year. Some of the areas that we're going to focus on for next year include marketing of the medical district, the Symphony Park development projects, the office tenant incentive program, new market tax credits allocations, the contribution to the city's general fund of $1.7 million for maintenance of the RDA area. We saw that on the general fund side as well. We're looking at ways to transfer some of the EUD, economic and urban development positions, from the city's general fund over to the RDA, so the RDA can help cover those costs. And then lastly on this slide, the red bullet at the bottom, we've added in the money for the Fremont Street Experience Canopy project that you approved the bond issuance for, which is being now included in the overall budget, which you see on this next slide.
Could you explain what, Mayor, through the mayor,
Yes, thank you.
thank you, contribution to the city of $1.7 million for maintenance in RDA areas?
Yeah, so this is an agreed-upon amount from the RDA to the city to cover maintenance in areas that are funded, that are within the redevelopment area project area. So this is an annual allocation that goes from the redevelopment agency to the city's general fund to help cover the cost of that maintenance.
Thank you.
You should explain the...
In terms of the overall budget for the redevelopment agency, this chart shows you, as we had, one slide too many here. This chart shows you 3 columns, one for fiscal year 17 actuals, one for our year-end estimate for fiscal year 18, and then one for the proposed budget for fiscal year 19. You can see that we're estimating to bring in $34 million of revenues for fiscal year 19. That does include the most of the $9.5 million you from LVCVA, which is going towards the construction project, as well as the monies from the debt issuance. On the expenditure side, you see the first line there, the Fremont Street Experience project. As you recall, the monies from Fremont Street, LVCVA, and the RDA are all flowing through the RDA budget. So the entire project basically is flowing through the budget, with the exception of about $1 million that FSE is putting in cash. So that's the main reason why the budget for this coming year is growing so much as compared to the prior year budget. So $52.4 million is our overall expenditure appropriation that we're requesting for next year. Just looking now in summary at the total city general fund and other funds budgets, our overall budget for all funds of the city, which includes general fund, capital project funds, enterprise funds, internal service funds, special revenue funds, and debt service funds, is projected to total $1.5 billion for next fiscal year. The general fund piece of that at $574 million, the capital program at $366 million, which includes the wastewater sanitation fund projects. Overall, we talked about our staffing level, and you can see here that the increase in the proposed positions for next fiscal year are 64 positions, minus the 8 that we're funding through closeout of current positions, for a net increase of 56 full-time equivalent positions. And that is our proposal for next fiscal year. In terms of overall takeaways, the one thing that we tried to point out is that overall our revenue growth rate is not keeping up with our expenditure growth rate, and so that's something that we have to try to balance out in the future. That's the primary reason why City manager has assembled Team 2020 to try to address that ongoing structural deficit. We really need to have revenue growth that averages equal to or
See those.
at least the same as our overall expenditure growth in order to have a projected balanced budget moving forward. So that's the area that we're really going to try to focus on, is to bring those two lines into balance. We've put together an expansion budget that we think responds to council's highest priority areas of public safety, funding both our internal public safety departments as well as the Metropolitan Police Department budgets. We've added marshals for park security. We've even accelerated some marshals that we previously had thought we would have to wait until fiscal year 2020 for. We've put monies towards the homeless initiative, towards mobile integrated healthcare in our fire and rescue department. We put monies towards neighborhood support of graffiti and tree programs. This overall is a balanced budget for next fiscal year. This is today the state's required public hearing on the cities and the redevelopment agencies' final budget proposal for fiscal year 2019. And Mayor, I would ask that you, at the end of my presentation, open up the public hearing concurrently, but that you'd have to approve the budget separately for both the city as well as the redevelopment agency.
I'd like to just at this moment, before you go into this, really commend you and the entire team for responding to the issues that the council brought before you a couple of months ago as priorities, including into the neighborhoods and the graffiti and parks, everything. But in the order of, on that last slide, in that second bullet, the priorities: public safety, metro marshals, park security, homeless, mobile integrated healthcare, and neighborhood support. It's so responsive to what that morning was, and we thank you and really appreciate the direction that the council gave and that you did respond to it. I think it's commendable, and it's just a wonderful feeling for us up here to know that you really have listened and done everything that working us towards the goals that we want for this community. So I thank you, and we're glad you're here and doing this. So I see, yes.
I just wanted to say that I really back what the mayor is saying. I've been here longer than any other person up here, and during all those years, I would say this is the finest year in meeting the requests, the specific needs within different wards that the representatives of the wards have brought to you. I couldn't believe it. A couple of things I thought, oh boy, I'm not going to get any place on this one. And already somebody, in fact, this morning I made a phone call about some place I thought was going to be cut in the budget. It had been originally. And I called the individual director of that department, and he told me that Jorge had already taken care of it, you see. So he knew, and he knew our needs, and what she's saying is absolutely true. You've done a magnificent job, not only in the amount of work you've done, but also in meeting the needs of, I think, our residents and our people representing the wards up here.
And it does show the leadership of our city manager, and we thank you. I mean, this 2020 and diving deeply into painfully areas that have been long overlooked to address. And I think we have a very strong council that may be annoying at some points, but the reality is, you know, you've been so very responsive to that retreat and the requests, so I thank you.
Madam Mayor, I just have to praise our entire team, starting with the city manager's office, with Gary all the way through all of my assistants and all the directors. Everybody stepped up this year. They all worked together, and it's been a great process, so I really want to commend the entire team.
Got you at the wrong time. Now you can please go back to your finals.
So my final slide, assuming your approval of the budget today, we'll be filing the final budget with the state on June 1st, actually by June 1st, and filing the 5-year CIP with the state by August 1st of this year. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and it is my pleasure to serve as your Chief Financial Officer for the city, and I'm sure that everybody here today is very much committed to this organization, and putting together this budget was actually our pleasure. So you don't really need to thank us, but thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and I know you're thrilled that you are part of Las Vegas instead of San Jose, as the Golden Knights keep moving along through city after city. So
I'm very excited
I
about the
might
night.
separate and give you my pin. I might, but I might not, so, for good luck. But anyway, you have asked that we conduct our second public hearing, so let's do that. Anyone from the public who wishes to address any questions to Mr. Aimling or Scott Adams, please, or any part of the budget, please come forward. This is a good sign, seeing and hearing none. So, at this point, I am going to ask Mayor Pro Tem if we could move on to a motion on item number 5.
You know, Madam Mayor, Madam Mayor, real quick, I just have a question.
Okay.
I have a question for staff. You know, as we move, and this is my first time with the budget, but, you know, as we created the Vision 2045 Downtown Master Plan and how we've created, you know, different visions of where we want to go, is there a way to segment out to say that these particular budget items or these areas are geared to push those agendas per se? So, you know, like we do these things, and then how do we keep track of if we're making progress on it? And, you know, of the Vision 2045 Downtown Master Plan, within the historic west side of Las Vegas, there's the 100 Plan. And since I've been here, I haven't heard anybody brief me, talk to me, or mention, not once, and anybody about the 100 Plan. And so the question kind of goes to, how are we moving items forward, and how does it tie into the budget? Does that make sense?
Scott Adams again. We are actually very aware of the 2045 Master Plan downtown, and I would say a lot of the items that are in the capital budget as well as things in the operating budget reflect a commitment to seeing through the implementation of that. As it relates to the 100 Plan, and I may need some of our team to help me a little bit here, a portion of the 100 Plan in West Las Vegas was incorporated as part of the expanded definition of downtown and became part of a bigger downtown area. If you remember, going back, we had a definition of downtown we call the Centennial Plan boundary, and when we went through this recent master plan and adopted a new boundary, it expanded it greatly. It went into the medical district, it went up into West Las Vegas, and it might have even gone a little bit east as well. So we have a newly defined downtown, and so I think what we can do, certainly weren't prepared to do it today, but going forward, start to identify more clearly the investments we make in those areas so that you better understand the commitment that you're making in your budget policy to the implementation of that. I'll give you an example, one project. The medical district was a huge part of the downtown master plan. We redefined downtown to include it, and I think if you recall here, we've got a commitment to a parking garage as part of the medical district. So that would be an example of the kinds of commitments we're making going forward. So I'd be more than glad to start separating that out and start reporting that to you in briefings and otherwise and how we're doing that.
I just think it's important to keep track that we're making progress specifically to, as we create these master plans or create these strategies that we're pushing, moving forward. And I would, just an FYI, I would love to get a specific briefing by whomever regarding specifically about the 100 Plan, so that I know exactly what it is, what's been approved, what hasn't been approved, if there's budget towards that, and how we're executing to implement the 100 Plan. Thank you.
Through
Thank
you, Mayor.
Yes.
I think it would be good also, Cedric, if you could get a copy of how they've been expanding downtown. When I came on this council, we were not downtown at all, you know. All of a sudden, we're downtown. In fact, we complained a couple of years, what are we, downtown or this or that? They'd call us at different times. And then they incorporated everything. And you remember that area I showed you on the map the other day that is going to be part of the medical district that's in your ward?
Yep.
That got added to downtown too, so.
Yeah. You know, I just want to at least from a personal perspective, ensure that, like, we do these things, and let's execute on it, right? And how do we know that what we're doing, example was, the Board of, UNLV talks about Tier 1 Carnegie High status. We talk about research dollars, but how do we know specifically what factors are tying into attaining this? How do we know what factors are tying into I think the downtown master plan is it will never be completed. It's an evolutionary process, but how do we know that we're pushing forward off of the agenda that we stated? That's all. But I completely understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mayor Pro Tem, if you would, let's have a motion on agenda item 5, please.
I move to approve accepting the fiscal year 2019 City of Las Vegas tentative budget and fiscal year 2019 City of Las Vegas final budget, including the capital improvement plan.
Thank you. This motion, please vote, and please post.
And we'll be taking Councilman Creer's vote orally.
They forgot to include me. Can you believe that? I know. It's called hazing, I think. Cedric Creer votes aye.
Thank you.
And that motion carries, adding Councilman Creer right in there. Okay, and agenda item number 6, Mayor Pro Tem, please.
I move that we approve the fiscal year 2019 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency tentative budget and fiscal year 2019 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency final budget.
Thank you very much. Please vote and please post.
Aye.
Thank you.
Councilman Creer says aye.
Aye.
And post, and thank you very much. And since we have already had public comment, this meeting, is it, no?
Not the final one.
Oh, we have the final one still. Hold on. I got too excited.
Yeah.
As we've done this work. Citizen participation, public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the City Council. No subject may be acted upon by the City Council unless that subject is on the agenda and scheduled for action. If you wish to be heard, please come to the podium and give your name for the record. The amount of discussion on any single subject, as well as the amount of time any single speaker is allowed, may be limited. This is your opportunity to address the council, but the council is not able to respond or engage in dialogue. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak under this portion of the agenda? Thank you. Now, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you. And let me give you, if I